Okay, Rabbi, it's good to be back after a little bit of hiatus. I went fundraising for 3 weeks, and then I needed therapy for a couple more weeks. But now we're back on track, hopefully. And be it as it may, next week we are not going to be having a shiur, so I may indulge myself and take a little bit longer than usual. I know it's hard to believe that, because I'm not going to give the same shiur in 2 weeks continuation. So let's go. We'll do it quickly. We'll get it done. The question is, the basic question that we deal with today is, and nowadays there's a concept called a biopsy, and they take biopsies of testicles, and in order for all different various reasons. And the question is that mutter or not? Is that something that we would want to be done or not to be done? Right? We have a doctor here in the house, so he's well aware of this. And you're going to ask me, Rabbi, fine, can you think of something else to talk about? But no, the answer is no. This is what we're going to talk about. And the question is, what's the issue? Take a biopsy, big deal. Biopsy means you take like a little bit out of it and then check out what's going on over there for whatever reason. People cannot, for all different types of reasons, to analyze it for infertility or for other reasons. Now, before we do that, we're going to go off on a different subject that seems to have no connection, but we'll see how it is connected. In this week's parsha, we find that Amram marries Yocheved. Yocheved was Amram's relative, right? It's actually his aunt. And we find in the Torah that Avram married Sarah. Sarah was actually Avram's niece, all right? And the Rabbeinu B'chaya says in this week's parsha that it's quite commendable and quite something that is noteworthy to actually marry your relative. It's a good idea to marry your relative, and that's what should be done. And that's why Amram looked to marry Yocheved, which is her relative, and Moshe and Avram wanted to marry his relative. And that's what the Rabbeinu B'chaya says. And he says, basically, marriage is difficult enough as it is. Gotti will tell you all about that. And hence, to make things a little bit more smoother, it's better to marry someone who you are at least have some natural affinity to your relative. Anyway, you probably like them in some way, or you're more culturally attuned to each other, or you're on the same level. So it's a good thing to marry your relative. So says the Rabbeinu B'chaya in this week's parsha. The problem is, we all know that to marry your relative in our days at least is a big problem, in the sense of there's a better chance of a child being born with a malformed or some type of sickness. Why is that? We all know. Because if both parents have a problematic gene, then there's a big chance that the kid will end up being born with an abnormality. So usually family members have the same type of genes. So if you marry someone from the same family, in the family there's a good chance that the two members will have the same problematic gene. But if you marry someone out of the family, then even if you have the gene, or your partner has a gene, but both of you together won't have it. So we know nowadays that it's a taboo. It's not a good idea to marry into your family. The question is, what happened? So, like, Rabbeinu B'chaya says it's a great idea. Marry your family. It's a good thing. And we know nowadays that it's just not a great thing. We know in the Hasidic circles, certain Hasidic circles, that they marry into each other. There's a big problem of child defects, birth defects, and this is a big issue. So what do we do with this? So the truth is,
Rabbi, just to clarify, you can't marry your aunt and your niece.
You can marry your niece. Your aunt, after the Torah was given, you can't marry your aunt. That is true. But Amram was allowed to marry Yocheved, even though it was his aunt. It was before the Torah was given. So the truth is, the Gemara talks about this. The Gemara in Yevamos says that it's a good idea to love your wife and to respect her. And then it says here, the Gemara says, it's a big mitzvah to marry your sister's daughter. And then the Gemara brings a pasuk to prove that that's a good thing to do. That it's a mitzvah, a special mitzvah to marry your niece from your sister. So Rishonim here already talk about, is it only your niece from your sister, or even your niece from your brother? All right? But already over here in the Gemara we're thinking here this idea, it's a good thing to marry your relative. So Rashi asked this question. Rashi himself says, why did you talk about a niece from your sister's daughter? So Rashi says, says, because usually a person likes his sister a lot. Rashi says, Gigui Adam Rabban Achaisai. I don't know where Rashi's coming from. I love my sisters, don't get it wrong, but Rashi says that some reason or other a person has a kinship or he has a connection with his sister, and therefore, if he marries his sister's daughter, it's going to be a great shidduch. It's going to be a marriage from the movies. It's going to be wonderful. It's going to be great. Well, yeah, maybe. So that's what Rashi says. So Rashi says specifically, it seems from Rashi he's zoning in not every relative, like we said to Rabbi Bachai, just your daughter's, your sister's daughter. The Rasputin asks the same question. The Rasputin says, hey, why are you talking about the sister's daughter? The Rasputin says, it really doesn't make a difference. It could be a niece from your brother, a niece from your sister. But usually, Rasputin says that usually if your brother calls you up and says, hey, I got a daughter who's not been married. She's 46 years old. You got to do me a favor. Marry her. You tell your brother, go fly a kite. When your sister calls you up with tears, right? With puppy tears. I got a daughter who's 46 years old. Come on, your uncle. Take care of her. Marry her. No. There's a good chance that you'll give in to your sister. So according to Rasputin, the truth is it's no different. A niece from your brother or a niece from your sister. It just happens to be there's a better chance they'll be convinced by your sister who is going to harry you until you acquiesce and you agree. Okay. Pshat 3 is Rabbeina's Tam Pshat. Rabbeina's Tam Pshat is, no, it's Dafka. It's Dafka, the niece of your sister. Why? Why the Dafka, the niece of your sister? Because you know the Gemara in Baba Basra says, if you want to get married, right? Let's say Gadi decides he wants to get married, right? So what does Gadi do? Who did he check out? He checks out his father-in-law's bank account? No, that's not what the Gemara says. The Gemara says you check out the potential wife's, the prospective wife's brother, right? Because then the kids will be like that brother. So Gadi wants to marry, let's say, Sarah. She looks at Sarah's brother. If Sarah's brother, let's say Sarah's brother is Yaakov. Oh, if Yaakov is a Talmid Chacham, my kids will be a Talmid Chacham. Because my kids are going to be just like Yaakov. So if you think about it, if you make the equation, it comes out your sister's kids are just like you, are a carbon copy of you. Your sister's kids, according to that Gemara, are actually is a facsimile of you. That's what the Gemara says. What does the Gemara say? When you want to someone else wants to get married, look at your wife's brother, because the kids will be like that. That basically means your niece is a facsimile of you. So that's why you should marry your niece from your sister, because you're going to get along great, because she actually is just like you. So it's similar to Rashi, but it's even a stronger pshat than Rashi. Your sister's daughter is exactly like you. Is a facsimile of you. Is a carbon copy of you. Oh, that's pshat number. So according to that, it's dafka, your niece from your sister. The Rivan says something quite remarkable. He says, you know what the Gemara says, a niece from your sister? Because if you marry a niece from your brother, there's a good chance that you destroy the mitzvah of Yibum. Because what happens if you marry your niece from your brother, and God forbid that guy dies? Esav marries Yaakov's daughter, Dinah, right? And then Esav dies. Yaakov can't do Yibum because Dinah's his daughter. So the reason why the Gemara picks Bas Achoisai is because we don't want you to marry your Bas Ach, because if you marry your Bas Ach, you will undo the mitzvah of Yibum. You won't be able to do the mitzvah of Yibum. There is no kid. No, you're not getting it. Esav, Yaakov, Esav married Dinah. If Esav if Esav dies, in principle, Yaakov should marry Dinah, but Yaakov can't because it's his daughter, right? I know Yaakov has kids, but Esav never had any kids. Okay, these. What?
What about all her brothers? Why is it?
What about all? Well, yeah, if there are other brothers, right? if Esav has other brothers, then there won't be a problem. If Esav, right, there wouldn't be a problem in that case. But the Gemara, that's why the Gemara, our question was, why is the Gemara talking about Bas HaChoisei? Answer number one, Rashi says is, you'll probably have a better marriage with Bas HaChoisei because you love your sister, you love the kid. According to Rasputin, it makes no difference what type of niece, it doesn't make a difference. It just is Bas HaChoisei because in practicality, your sister will force you into the marriage. Rabbi Tam says, Dafka Bas HaChoisei, because your niece from your sister is exactly like you. Based on that Gemara in Bava Basra, that when you want to check out Shidduchim, you look at the brother. So if you make the mathematics, basically that niece is just like you. According to the Rivan, is because there's a chance you'll be undermining the mitzvah Yibum. There's a chance you'll be undermining the mitzvah Yibum if you marry your niece from your brother. Because if God forbid the guy who got married died, there won't be, like you said, if there are no other brothers, there won't be a Yibum. Okay. The Rambam says it makes no difference niece, it makes no difference nephew, it makes no difference cousin. The Gemara means here any relative, like the Rebbeinu B'chaya. It's better to marry any relative. Doesn't make a difference. So why did it say Bas HaChoisei? Why did it talk about niece and nephew? Why did it talk about niece? Rambam says, because that's your closest living relative that you're allowed to marry, right? You can't marry your mother, you can't marry your daughter, right? The closest relative that is mutter is Bas HaChoisei. That's your closest relative. But the truth is, this halacha is not only for a niece, it's for any relative, a cousin, a second cousin, and so says the Maggid Mishnah. He says in black and white, marriage is difficult enough, and if you marry a relative, there's a better chance that'll work out. And then why does the Gemara talk about nephew and nieces, whatever? It's lav dafka. It just picks the one that's the closest possible relative that you could marry. But it applies to all relatives. And so is brought down in the Shulchan Aruch. That you should marry a relative. So he just based more than anyone else. So we just compounded the question. Not only is it Rabbeinu B'chaya who says you should marry a relative, this is brought down in the Shulchan Aruch and in the Rambam. So what do we do with this? Now, the big problem is we have something called the Rabbeinu Yehuda Chassid. We've all heard of Rabbeinu Yehuda Chassid because whenever you want to take a haircut on Rosh Chodesh, oh no, so you're going to get the Yehuda Chassid. Like who? Yeah, you can't take a haircut on, right? So we all know. So Rabbi Yehuda Chassid lived in the 11th century, 1140 until 1217. This is an early Rishon. That's pretty early Rishon. Right? And he was the Rebbe of the Smag. Big man, Rabbi Yehuda Chassid, not all the Rishonim were called the Chassid. And he had some famous books. He has a book on Brachas, Taisus Rabbeinu Yehuda on Brachas, but his most famous book is Sefer Chasidim. Now, in the beginning of Sefer Chasidim, something called Tzavos Rabbeinu Yehuda Chassid, right? Testimonial or the will, the last wishes of Rabbeinu Yehuda Chassid, and over there he gives a bunch of rules. And some of those rules are quite famous. We quite know some of them. Like, what's the most famous one? You can't marry, you cannot marry a girl who has the same name as your mother. Right? Or a father-in-law shouldn't have the same name as a son-in-law. Where did that come from? That comes from Rabbeinu Yehuda Chassid. And everyone is so mocked with Yehuda Chassid. Some reason or other, don't ask me why, somehow the service of Rabbeinu Yehuda Chassid has become so paramount and so important that everyone is mocked on Rabbeinu Yehuda Chassid. The Kotzker used to make a joke, too bad he didn't put in the Aseret Dibros into Savas Rabbeinu Yehuda Chassid because then everyone would keep it. Right? That's how accepted or how weighty is Rabbeinu Yehuda Chassid. So one of the things he write here is, Lo yisa adam bas achiv bas achaisai. Do not marry your niece. It's black and white. Do not marry your niece. Okay? So Rabbeinu Yehuda Chassid. Everyone asks, Rabbeinu Yehuda Chassid, how in the world can you go against an open Gemara? An open Gemara says you should marry your niece. And here he says openly, Lo yisa adam bas achiv oy bas achaisai. So, this question was asked to the Noid Yehuda. The Noid Yehuda was dealing with the Shaila of a Chassan and where there were same names between the Chassan and the Chassan's father. And the Noid Yehuda, that is Kever in Prague not too long ago, right? So the Noid Yehuda says, If anyone says anything against the Talmud, you don't got to listen to them. It's heresy, it's blasphemy, you don't got to listen to them. He says, but I got one problem, because there's one person, who actually says something against the Talmud, and we just can't ignore him. Who is that? Rabbi Yehuda Chassid, and he brings down. Because Rabbi Yehuda Chassid writes in his Tzavah, right? You shouldn't marry a nephew, a niece, you shouldn't marry a niece. That's against the Gemara. The Gemara says a mitzvah. Rabbi Yehuda Chassid says a son and a father and a son shouldn't marry sisters. A father and a son should not marry sisters. The problem is, we have Gemaras not that way. Rav Papa and his son actually married sisters. Rav Papa and his sons was married to sisters. Says Rabbi Yehuda Chassid in his Tzavah, 2 brothers shouldn't marry 2 sisters. I happen to have a friend that I know, 2 brothers got married to 2 sisters. I happen to know that. They actually got divorced, one of them. But that's interesting. But 2 brothers shouldn't marry 2 sisters. And we know the Gemara says, the open Gemaras, there are 80 pairs of Kahanim, brothers, married sisters. Meaning 2 brothers married 2 sisters. And he brings a bunch of things that Rabbi Yehuda Chassid said that is blatantly, openly against, and he says, if it was any other one, I would just take the book and burn it. But I can't do it because it's Rabbi Yehuda Chassid. So we got to do something here. We got to figure this out. So says Rabbi Yehuda famously, and he says, no, this whole thing, Tzavah, Rabbi Yehuda Chassid, look at the word, Tzavah. He wrote a will, a last testimony. Who did he write it to? He didn't write it to everyone. It was only for his kids. So anything that it says in the Tzavah is particularly to his progeny. And unless you know that you're a direct line of Yehuda Chassid, you don't got to worry about anything here. Right? He says here, because Rabbi Yehuda Chassid saw Baruch Kotshai, that for his kids, it's not going to be a good idea to marry a relative or brothers should marry sisters. And that's okay, that's not going against the Talmud. The Talmud is talking about to Klal Yisrael, to the general community. If Rabbi Yehuda Chassid has some type of way of knowledge to know that for his kids it's not good, that's not called go against the Talmud. Okay? That's what he says over here. Oh. Now, so therefore, you can take a haircut. According to me, you can take a haircut on Rosh, on what do you call it? On Rosh Chodesh. You don't got to worry about, putting. According to Rabbi Yehuda Chassid, if there's a window in the house, you can never cover it up. So they always put like a little hole over there. According to Rabbi Yehuda, you don't got to worry about that. All of that was a tzavah just for Rabbi Yehuda Chassid's progeny. It has no application. No, the problem is none of the Achronim take this night of Yehuda seriously. I mean, they take Rabbi Yehuda seriously, obviously, but this particular part they don't take seriously. And the reason is because there were different nuschais of the tzavah of Yehuda Chassid. And in most of the nuschais, he writes down sometimes, and what I'm saying now is just for my kids. Meaning he spells out some of the things he writes down. He spells out openly. For example, he brings out, he says here, a person should not marry 2 sisters. Now that meaning one sister died and then you marry another sister. That's an open pasuk in Chumash, you're allowed to do that. And he writes down, and I mean only for my kids, only for my progeny. So sometimes he actually says openly that I'm talking to my kids. But the other times, he doesn't say that. And by the case of marrying the niece and nephew, he does not say it's only for his own kids. So again, according to Rabbi Yehuda, the whole tzavah, Rabbi Yehuda Chassid was only for his kids. But like I said, many Achronim do not take that, do not accept that, and they say no. So back to square one. How could Rabbi Yehuda Chassid go against an open Gemara? Second answer is, well, Rabbi Yehuda Chassid lived basically 600 or 700 years after the Gemara was finished, right? And he noticed that things were not going good when he married relatives. Like we said, genetically, it's not good to marry relatives. So he saw that there was a change in nature. There was a change, Ishtani Teva. Right, the Gemara said marry your niece, marry your cousin, marry your relative. It's good. It's good for Shalom Bayis. Wonderful. Rabbi Yehuda Chassid said, listen, empirically, we see that it's not a good thing. We see, I say it's going against the Gemara? Yeah. So, the rules of genetics changed, things changed, and therefore Rabbi Yehuda Chassid was talking about 700 years later. Oh, that is one of the answers that are given. Now, the problem is are you allowed to say that? Are you allowed to use this concept Ishtani Hateva? that we could say, yeah, the Gemara says something, but in our days, things are different because nature change. There's been a biological, a physical change. Is that something that we're allowed to say? Is that heresy? Is that like a cop-out? Is that like, or is that legitimate? Do we have a concept of a shtani ateva legitimate halacha? Oh, so the truth is, we find this at least in 10 places in Poskim and Shas, and this is not an exhaustive list. 1, we know the Gemara says you're not allowed to eat meat and fish together. No meat and fish together. The Gemara says why? Because it is perilous, dangerous. The Magen Avraham says it doesn't apply nowadays. In nowadays, you can eat meat and fish together because there is no danger. It does not apply. Ishtani ateva. Now, the Chassam Sofer says, even though Klal Yisrael has accepted the minhag not to eat meat and fish together, but we do rely on the Magen Avraham that we could cook meat and fish in the same pot. You're allowed to cook meat and fish in the same pot because really the whole thing, like the Magen Avraham said, shouldn't apply nowadays. So whatever we have a minhag based on the Gemara, we keep that custom. We don't just what the custom is, not to eat directly meat and fish together. But you don't really have to. You don't have to have a meat fork and a fish fork. I know people do, but Chassam says you don't need that because the whole thing anyway really doesn't make sense anymore because it's shtani ateva. That's number 1. Number 2, the Gemara says very clearly, a woman will never give birth until she fulfills the term of pregnancy. 270 days, not a day before. And the Gemara uses for halacha. The Gemara says if a baby is born 260 days, 250 days, in the 9th month, you know it's not going to live. 1,000% it's not going to live. You got nothing to worry about. It's a nafel, and there's all different ramifications for that. For Bechor and for Yavama. Anyone who's married knows, or that's not nowadays. That is not nowadays. You could have a lady give birth in week 38, 36, 37, 38, 39. You can have it always. So you say, so the Gemara, the Ramah says, he brings down the law because I know the Gemara says any child that's born within the 30 days of the 9th month is basically a dead kid, and there's basically yibum. And nowadays it doesn't apply. We see it's not true.
That reference is before 30 days before, 30 days after.
No, but it's between, let's say, 240 and 270 days. It can't. If it's born in between, then it will not live. We know that's not what happens nowadays. We just know it's not true. People don't give birth exactly the 40th week. Anyway, so the Gemara brings down black and white. The Gemara brings down black and Shulchan Aruch. Right now, what I'm trying to bring out to you is it can't be the people in the Gemara. Even if God forbid you have these type of thoughts, they were backwards, and what do you mean they were backwards? I mean, they would know if women gave birth every time at 270 days, right? They have a plenty of pool to make experiments on. It cannot be that they didn't realize that they were wrong. So it must be that it was a Shtana Teva. I'm trying to say even for those who think, they're backwards, they're the Flintstones, people in the Gemara like the Flintstones, they don't know nothing. It can't be. It can't be. It's something that's so obvious, right? And certainly us who know that the people in the Gemara are on a much higher level than us. 3, it's Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch says if you do a bris milah on Shabbos and there's no hot water, you must boil water to wash the baby with hot water. You must. If not, because it will sure die. And the Shulchan Aruch, this is Gemara's. The Shulchan Aruch says, and by the way, this does not apply nowadays because it's not true. Nowadays, they don't need hot water. Cold water is fine. So what happened? Right? So Shulchan Aruch says black and white. Ishtani ateva. Things have changed. The Gemara in Mermaid Cotton. The Gemara there is talking about fishing. And the Gemara says, Ada the fisherman said, the best time is to eat fish is right before it gets spoiled. Right? I guess he was trying to boost up his sales, so he was like, yeah, spoiled fish is great. That's what Gemara says. The best fish to eat is spoiled fish, right before it spoils. Taich says over there, don't try this at home, kids, because that was in the good old days. And nowadays, do not eat fish that's about to get spoiled. So Taich says openly, this is like empirical things. This is a lot. So Taich says black and white. In the good old days, spoiled fish was good. And nowadays, spoiled fish is not good. Another example, the Gemara says openly, a cow that gave birth when it's 3 years old, you know for sure that it's a bechor. The baby that's born is a bechor, right? We learn talk for kohen. We know to be a bechor is an important thing to know. If the cow gave birth in its third year, you know this is his first child because the cow can't give birth in the first 2 years of being a mother. Tyson says right there. By the way, nowadays it's not true. And nowadays a cow could be a 2-year-old cow could give birth. Black and white, Tyson says, right? Okay. Another example. All the medicines in the Gemara. All the medicines in the Gemara. I mean, first of all, they sound very odd. But even if you want to say that's a whole big sugya, is that min Shemayim, Torah min Sinai, the medicines in the Gemara, the story of the medicines. But even if it wasn't min Shemayim, but obviously they wouldn't write it if it didn't work. They want Amoraim. Obviously it worked, or else they would have wrote it, right? It must have worked. They weren't idiots, right? It must have worked. Forget about the fact, did they get it from the Sinai or didn't get it from Sinai, right? It must have worked. And we know they don't work it nowadays, right? Another thing, the Rambam writes we don't have to wash our hands anymore in the morning because there is no ruach ra. The Gemara says you have to wash your hands in the morning, not the washing before tefillah. Wash your hands just in the morning because there's a ruach ra. A bad type of spirit descends upon our hands. Rambam said doesn't apply nowadays. No bad spirits. They're all gone. So even though the Shulchan Aruch does bring this down, you have to wash your hands in the morning. But bottom line is, the Malbim Paskins, if you touch food, according to the strict halacha, you got to throw out the food because a ruach ra was imparted from your hand onto the food. But halacha l'maisa, since the Rambam says there's no ruach ra nowadays anyway, if you touch food before you wash it in the morning, you don't got to throw it out. So I'm just giving you. I have another 10 more examples here that we see. It must be Ishtana Teva. It must be. There's no way out of it because there's no way that they wouldn't have seen the difference. Another thing is the Gemara says openly. A girl is always born face up and a boy is born face down. Open Gemara. And we know it's not true nowadays. It's just not true nowadays. It's not true. It can't be that they were retarded. They didn't realize that. No, it must be Ishtano Teva. So they bring here a bunch of rayas, this concept of Ishtano Teva. We'll see soon that it has halachic ramifications. By all the things I said, it has halachic ramifications. So bottom line is that could be the answer. That's right. Rabbi Yehuda Chassan knew the Gemara, but he understood 700 years later because of the problem of genetics. So he said it's not a good idea to marry your niece because there's a better chance, a better prevalence of a child having a birth defect. Okay.
2 brothers and 2 sisters.
What?
How that retired 2 brothers?
Yeah, I'm not retired to everything. I'm just retired now the nephew and the niece issue. Okay. Answer number 3 is based on the Stei Chemed. The Stei Chemed says no. In the times of the Gemara, there was also genetic problems. No. In the times of the Gemara knew it's not good to marry a relative. It's not good. So why does the Gemara say yes, marry relatives? He says because in times of the Gemara, Shema Mitzvah Lo Yedara. In times of the Gemara, people got married for pure intentions. And we have a rule, when you're doing a mitzvah and you do it for the right reasons, you don't got to worry about something adverse happening, meaning something that's not clear will happen. Obviously, if we do a mitzvah shaking a little, and if you walk in the middle of the highway, you're going to get killed. There's no question about that. But things like this, that maybe there'll be a genetic disease, you don't got to worry about it. If you're doing a mitzvah, l'shem shamayim, and you're doing it for the right reasons, you don't got to worry about genetic problems. But, says the Sefer Hasidim, that was in the good old days, when everyone got married for pure intentions. But nowadays, why do people get married? Because they want the father to support the rest of life. Or the girl looks good, right? Whatever it is. How many people are getting married for the reason, because I want to bring Avdei Hashem into the world, and I want to educate them in the ways of the Lord, right? Okay, maybe a little bit, maybe 10% that's what's going on, right? So basically, that's what's going on. There's no stira. The Sefer Hasidim was saying, in our days, most people don't get married for the right intent. And therefore, there is no protection against genetic disease. Now, you'll think I'm making this up.
Doesn't the Gemara Yevamos say that we don't do Yibam?
Oh, very good, right? Very good, Gadi. Very good, wait. Now, you'll think I'm making this up. The truth is, the Sefer Hasidim in the Sefer himself says it's black and white. He says, listen to this. It's good for a chassid to marry his niece. He says, it's good for a chassid to marry his niece. He says a good reason. He says it's because the opposite of Bein Tam. Because if you marry your niece, what?
He has the right to want it.
Right. It's good, but he says here, it's a good thing for a chassid to marry his niece, but he said a Rasha shouldn't do it. Only someone is doing a l'shem mitzvah. So once we have that the Sefer says it's black and white, everything is answered. Right. We don't have to say like a second teretz that there was a change in nature. There was genetic disease in the time of the Gemara too. But at the time of the Gemara where everyone got married l'shem shemayim, they weren't worried about it. But in our days, the Sefer says most people are not getting married for the 100% pure intent. Hence, we're afraid of genetic disease. And he says, hopefully, if you're a pure chassid, then it's okay. Okay? That's the Stei Chemetz's answer. The Sons of Rav gives a similar answer, but it's a little twist. He's not into the genetic disease problem. He says, listen, really, we find that by Yavama, like Gadi brought down, you're supposed to do Mitzvah Yibum. But the Gemara says, don't do Mitzvah Yibum anymore. We don't do Mitzvah Yibum anymore because people don't have 100% the right intent. What does that mean? Because really, Yibum looks like Erva. It looks like Erva. Because actually, you are marrying your sister-in-law. So the Gemara says, when you did mitzvah Yibum l'shem shemayim, it sort of overshadowed the problem that it would look like an Erva. Because since you're doing l'shem mitzvah, it didn't have any type of notion of something not 100% kosher. But since already in time of the Gemara, for the issue of Yibum, people did not get married for the right intent, don't do Yibum because it doesn't look good. It looks like it has a whiff of erva. So says the Divrei Chaim, that's what Ben Yehuda Chassid means. Any relative has a whiff, has a smarting, looks like has a taint of looking like erva. We know it's not erva, but it looks like it. So if you do it l'shem shemayim, it sort of deals with that problem, sort of smothers that problem or pushes away that problem. But the second you're not doing l'shem shemayim, it does look more like you're over on is erva. So that's very similar to the third teretz. The third teretz was, since you're not doing l'shem shemayim, the genetic problems will come to be. According to the fourth Divrei Chaim teretz, since you're not doing l'shem shemayim, it does look like you are over on a issa erva. Oh. So what does this got to do with our issue? So we brought up here a concept of ishtani ateva. We said that we brought 10 different examples. We said maybe that is the legitimization of why Rabbi Yehuda Chassid said what he said you shouldn't marry a niece. Oh. But where do we find this issue of ishtani ateva most prevalent in Halacha? We find it by the issue of treifas. The Gemara says that there are treifas. We know there are animals that are not kosher. If you ever go to a shlacht house, only 40% of the animals are kosher because of the issue of treifas. The Gemara says openly, treifas don't live. Treifas do not live. They die for sure within 12 months. Emphatically. Oh. There's only one big problem. There's a problem. It's not true. We know now one of the examples of a treifas is you take out your appendix. If you take out the appendix of an animal or a person, right? I don't know if you know about it, but people live without their appendix. And there are many examples of this. So basically, we got a problem here. The Gemara says treifas do not live. We know it is not true. So there are 3 tshuvas that deal with it: the Rashba, the Chazon Ish, and the Igros Moshe. Now, the Rashba was asked this question about treifas. Some guy said, "By the way, Rashba, the treifas do live, not like the Gemara." So the Rashba says basically, what you're saying is blasphemy. It's heresy. If the Gemara says they don't live, they do not live. And I don't want to hear one word that you have to say about this, because you're saying falsehood and you're trying to uproot the Torah, and a lot of expletives and invectives. He goes to town. So the Rasputin says, if the Gemara says it don't live, it don't live. That's the end of the story. Okay, that's what he says, and that's it. Finished. Right? He says, and anyone who says that it did live, they made a mistake. It's a different animal. They don't know how to count. They think it was 12 years. It was really only 12 minutes. They don't know what they're talking about. Okay. Now, obviously, this is very hard to accept. And already the Rambam himself writes down, I know the Gemara says that treifas don't live, and I know they do live, but I don't care, that's the halacha. Treifas are usher, right? So everyone's trying to deal with this. No one is willing to accept what the Rasputin says, that they don't live anymore. Oh. So the Chazon Ish famously says, the Chazon Ish asks this question, he says it's very simple. He says, you know what? We have a famous Gemara in Avodah Zarah. 2,000 years of Toihu, 2,000 years of Torah, 2,000 years of Mashiach. Right? Where does he know that Mashiach comes after 6,000 years? Where did it come from? It's not Gemara. 2,000 years without Torah, 2,000 years of Torah, 2,000 years of Mashiach. Says the Chazon Ish, also based on the Gemara Baba Messiah, that Rav Asher Avina Seif Hara, they were the codifiers, and they were the ones who finished the time of Hira. Says the Chazon Ish, you know what that means? It means the reality of those 2,000 years, that decides what the law of the Torah is. When we want to decide what is the laws of Torah, what reality do we look at? We look at the 2,000 years of Torah. In the 2,000 years of Torah, which is basically up until when the Gemara was finished. Basically. The numbers don't work out 100%, come to me afterwards. But basically up until when the Gemara was finished, because the Gemara was finished in 4,258, basically. But basically in the 2,000 years, what the reality on the ground was then, that is Torah. So, do animals live without appendix? Yes, nowadays. But when the Gemara was written, or the 2,000 years of Torah, then an animal would not live if it didn't have its appendix. It was the Shtani Ateva. Nature changed. So you say if nature changed, so let's go according to reality now. No. Included in the tenet, or included in the dictum, 2,000 years of Torah, 2,000 years of Torah, 2,000 years of Mashiach, means we base Torah on what the reality was during the 2,000 years of Torah. And once the reality was set then, that is halacha, even though things changed. So that's how the Chazon Ish answers the question. Do they live now? Yes, treifas live now. You can live without appendix. An animal without appendix is a treifa? Yes. Why? Because then it didn't live. And that is the way we establish halacha based on those 2,000 years. This is the Chazon Ish. The Igros Moshe has a question. Can you do a biopsy on a man and take a little bit off of his testicle in order to do some type of testing? You say, why not? Well, we all know that there's something called Psuah Daka Lo Yaveh B'Kal Hashem. You're not allowed to marry a Psuah Daka. Someone who's through a manually, basically, not born this way, but someone who, after he was born, part of his testicle was taken off. You can't marry him. Psuah Daka Lo Yaveh B'Kal Hashem. Open pussy. And the Gemara says openly, exactly, this exact thing, taking a little bit of the testicle off. So if you go through this biopsy and you take off your testicle, the little bit of testicle, it comes out, you have to divorce your wife, or you can never marry a straight up Jewish girl, because it says Psuah Daka Lo Yaveh B'Kal Hashem. The problem is, the Gemara says that all Psuah Dakas, they don't have children. I mean, part of the issue is that anyone who's a Psuah Daka, whatever the different type of ailments may be, or injuries may be, they can't have children. We know they do this biopsy in order to make them have children. So basically, there was a Shtani Ateva. In the good old days, if you took off a part of the testicle, you couldn't have kids anymore, and you were Psuah Daka. And nowadays, if you take off a piece of testicle, whatever, that's what a biopsy is, you take a little bit out, no problem. You can have kids. So what do? It's the same thing like treifa. There was a change in nature, Shtani Ateva. So this is a question presented to Reb Moshe Feinstein. This is the question that was presented. Do you? It's an accident. Something went wrong, a Psuah Daka. So what do we do? L'chayra, based on what the Chazon Ish said, you should not do this biopsy. Because bottom line is, yes, nowadays when you take off this biopsy, no problem. You can have kids, no problem. But what does the Chazon Ish say? We look at the reality of the 2,000 years of 2,000 years of Torah. So if you look at that reality, in those days, if you did this biopsy, you would not be able to have kids. So, l'chayra, I cannot say this definitively, but seemingly, according to the Chazon Ish, you shouldn't do this procedure because then you would not be able to stay married to your wife. But Rav Moshe Feinstein obviously we can't allow that to happen. This is by the way, this procedure is not so uncommon. So what Rav Moshe Feinstein said, no. Rav Moshe Feinstein says, no, in our days, no problem. In our days, this biopsy is actually a healthy thing to do. It's a good thing to do. It doesn't cause any damage. So you're not called a pseudo daka. In the times of the Gemara, if you did it, you were a pseudo daka because it would inhibit you to having kids. But nowadays, it has no application. Then Rav Moshe is asking himself, wait a minute. By treifus, we don't say that. Rav Moshe says, I have a blatant contradiction. By treifus, we say, we don't care that you can live in nowadays without an appendix. It's treif. Because in the good old days, you couldn't live with it. You couldn't live without it. And by pseudo daka, we're saying the opposite. Oh, who cares that in the good old days you were a pseudo daka when you took off a piece of testicle? But in our days, it's not harmful. So that's Rav Moshe's dilemma. And he comes up with a solution. What's his solution? He says like this. He says if you actually look by the Hilchos Treifus, actually, I can't go through all the Gemaras, but actually it's twofold. The Mishnah says there are 8 categories of treifus, which really translate into 70 different types of treifus. But the Gemara says it's halacha Moshe miSinai, which are the treifus. I mean, God told Moses, this is a treifa, an animal missing its head, an animal missing its stomach, an animal missing its leg, an animal missing its appendix. That's stage 1. Moshe was told halacha Moshe miSinai, what were the treifus? And then God sort of said, and by the way, you should know, all these treifus don't live past 12 months. So it was a 2-part. One is, there was halacha Moshe miSinai, what are the treifus? 2 is, Rabbi said, and these things don't live. By pseudo daka, when God told Moses pseudo daka, he didn't say, this injury, that injury, that injury, this injury. And by the way, it's because they can't have kids. All the Rabbi Shalom said was, anyone who can't have kids because of such an injury is a pseudo daka. That's going to be the distinction, says Rav Moshe. By treifus, God said, openly, halacha Moshe Sinai, what are the treifus? And he says, because they don't live. By pseudo daka, that's not the way it was transmitted to Moshe. God didn't say, if a guy got this part cut off, that part cut off. No. All God said is you can't have children because of a accident. Again, if you're born this way, it's not a problem. You call it pseudo daka. Says Rav Moshe, that's the difference. That is the difference. By treifus, the issue that it does not live is not the main part of the transmission. It was a corollary. It was an adjunct. The main transmission was, this is a treifa. A treifa is a treifa. By the way, Rabbi Shalom said, by the way, they don't live. Or even as Rabbi Shalom said, and by the way, the reason is because they don't live, it doesn't make a difference. Since there's a halacha Moshe Sinai depicting particularly which are the treifas, and Moshe said more. Why was there halacha Moshe Sinai? Why didn't God just say, hey Moses, Moshe, anything that can't live in the treifas? Why did Rabbi Shalom actually depict which are the treifas? They were quite proficient in those days, especially in animal medicine. They knew what would live, what would die. And Moshe said, by force, by dint, that the Rabbi Shalom said it to him, said particularly watch out the treifas, Rabbi Shalom is intimating these are treifas no matter what. Even if they actually 2,000 years later do live. It doesn't make a difference. By pseudo daka, what was the transmission? The transmission was anyone that can't have children is a pseudo daka. Meaning, if it had a injury. So there, it's fluid. There it is fluidity. There we say, okay, taking a biopsy in the times of Gemara, you could never have a child again. And nowadays you could have a child. So, no did a pseudo daka. So it comes out, that's the nafkamina between the Chazon Ish and the Mermaid. According to the Chazon Ish, everything was locked into the year 2000 to 4000. Those 2,000 years of Torah, everything was locked in. So l'chayra, again, I'm not 100% sure, according to Chazon Ish, you should not take a biopsy. Because in those years, you wouldn't be able to have children. According to Rav Moshe, no. Everything is fluid. Everything that has a reason behind it and is a change is Tanya Teva. So, and nowadays, a pseudo doctor could have a kid, the one who has this biopsy. Only trephus is the only thing that we don't care that the nature changed. Why? Because the way the transmission of traits was given over, it was like a double transmission. One is Halacha Meishinai, this, and also they don't live. But since it's this double level, this double type of transmission, it's intimating, and we don't care if the fact changed later on in the future. Okay? Now, so Halacha Maisa, many people we basically rely on this Igris Moshe because it's very important to be able to do this type of testing. So Rabbi Isai, I just want to end off. So clearly we've shown, there's no question that there's been a Shtania Teva. I mean, I don't know if you know anything, I think our parents once gave a shir about Shiurim. There's a whole machlek about Shiurim. According to Noda B'Yehuda, the good old days, the eggs were much larger than the eggs nowadays. According to Slach and Noda B'Yehuda, all the Shiurim are double because the eggs are bigger in the good old days. So this is very prevalent, this concept of Shtania Teva. But by trephus is where it really, really comes to the fore. And I may add, just like there's clearly a change in nature in the physical world, in all these different areas, certainly in the spiritual world there's a change in nature, and therefore chinuch that may have worked in 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, may have to be a little bit, we have to sort of like orchestrate a little differently or formulate it a little differently. And that's what we do here in Ohr Somayach, Rabbi Isai. Okay.